In a cave in Israel, archaeologists found the remains of beer that is 13,000 years old. That's older than agriculture, older than the wheel, older than writing, older than almost everything we call civilization. Which raises a genuinely strange question. How were humans brewing alcohol before they even learned to farm the ingredients to make it? And here's the part that makes it stranger. Your body was already built for this. Right now, inside you, microbes are fermenting sugars into tiny amounts of ethanol. You are, very slightly, a brewery. We even carry a genetic mutation, around 10 million years old, that lets us process alcohol far faster than our ancestors once could. So this isn't a recent habit we picked up. Our bodies have been preparing for that 13,000-year-old beer for 10 million years. This is the story of how humans discovered alcohol. Not wine bars, not breweries, not the awkward office party where someone says too much. We're talking about the very first time a living thing felt that warm, loosening buzz and decided it wanted more. And the deeper you dig into it, the more a wild idea starts to look possible. That we didn't build civilization and then invent alcohol to celebrate. We may have built civilization because of alcohol. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The desire to drink is older than humanity itself. Let's start before there were humans at all. Picture a forest, maybe 10 million years ago. Up in the trees live the ancestors we share with chimpanzees and gorillas. Fruit is everywhere, and fruit has a secret. When it gets too ripe and falls to the forest floor, wild yeast lands on it and begins to feed on its sugars. That process has a byproduct: ethanol, alcohol. The fallen fruit is, very literally, beginning to ferment. Now, a primate that turned its nose up at slightly rotten fruit would go hungry. But a primate that liked the smell of fermentation, that was drawn toward it, would find food faster and find the ripest, most calorie-dense food at that. The buzz wasn't the point. The buzz was a signal. It said, calories, this way. This is what biologist Robert Dudley at UC Berkeley calls the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. His argument is simple and a little unsettling. Our attraction to alcohol isn't a modern flaw. It's an ancient survival instinct. We evolved to chase the scent of ethanol because, for millions of years, that scent meant dinner. And there's hard genetic evidence for this. A biologist named Matthew Kerrigan studied an enzyme called ADH4, the enzyme that breaks down alcohol in your body. He traced its history back through the primate family tree, and he found something remarkable. Around 10 million years ago, a single mutation appeared. Overnight, in evolutionary terms, our ancestors became roughly 40 times better at metabolizing ethanol. Why then? Because that's roughly when our ancestors were climbing down from the trees and spending more time on the ground, where the fruit was older, more fermented, more alcoholic. The ones who could handle that fruit without getting incapacitated survived. The ones who couldn't, didn't. Think about that for a second. The reason you can have a drink tonight and not collapse is a genetic gift from an ape that needed to eat rotten fruit off a forest floor 10 million years ago. That's not a party trick. That's deep time, written into your liver. But a taste for fermented fruit is one thing. Making alcohol on purpose is something else entirely. So let's jump forward, way forward, to that cave in Israel. The site is called Rockafet Cave, near Mount Carmel. The people who used it were the Natufians, hunter-gatherers living around 13,000 years ago, right on the edge of the last ice age. And here's why they matter. The Natufians were not farmers. They didn't have fields. They didn't have domesticated crops. They lived off wild plants and wild animals, the classic, supposedly primitive hunter-gatherer setup. And yet, in 2018, a team led by archaeologist Li Lu at Stanford analyzed stone mortars carved into the floor of that cave. Inside, they found microscopic residue, the chemical and physical fingerprints of fermented grain. Wild wheat and barley, malted and brewed into a kind of thin, porridge-like beer. Let that sink in. People who had not invented farming were brewing beer. The oldest evidence of alcohol production we've ever found doesn't come after civilization. It comes from people who were still chasing wild game with stone-tipped spears. So which came first, the bread or the beer? Because this is where one of the most beautiful arguments in all of archaeology kicks off. Back in 1953, an anthropologist named Robert Braidwood asked a question that sounds almost silly until you really think about it. We've always assumed humans started farming grain to make bread, to eat, to survive. But what if that's backwards? What if humans first started gathering and eventually planting grain, not to bake it, but to brew it? This is the beer before bread hypothesis. And the logic is genuinely hard to dismiss. Early wild grain was a pain to process into food. It was tough, it was fiddly, the payoff was small. But turn it into beer, and suddenly you've got something else entirely. Something that stores energy. Something that's safer to drink than dirty water. Something that makes a long, cold night around the fire feel a lot warmer. Something that, frankly, people would do hard, boring, back-breaking work to keep getting. And that's the key. Farming was miserable. The first farmers were shorter, sicker, and worked far longer hours than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. So why on earth would anyone choose it? Free bread is a weak motivator when you're exhausted and your back is destroyed. But we need to grow more grain so we can brew more beer for the feast? Now you've got a reason people will break their bodies for. Alcohol may have been the bribe that convinced humanity to settle down. It gets better. At a site in Turkey called Gobekli Tepe, a massive ring of carved stone pillars built around 11,000 years ago, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, archaeologists found enormous limestone vats, some holding up to 40 gallons, with traces of the chemical signatures left behind by fermentation. Gobekli Tepe was built by people who, again, were not yet full farmers. It looks like a gathering place, a place for rituals, for feasts, and possibly for getting the entire community gently, ceremonially drunk together. Now here's where we have to be careful, because absence of evidence is a trap. We have residue from 13,000 years ago. We have vats from 11,000 years ago. But the urge itself, the drunken monkey instinct, is millions of years older than any of it. The artifacts only show us the moment humans got organized about something they'd been doing in some form forever. Let me take you to the oldest recipe we've ever reconstructed. For that, we cross the world to a village called Jiahu in China, dating back around 9,000 years. A biomolecular archaeologist named Patrick McGovern, a man so dedicated to this field that people call him the Indiana Jones of ancient alcohol, analyzed pottery shards from the site. And from the residue, he didn't just confirm there was a drink. He worked out what was in it: rice, honey, hawthorn fruit, and possibly grape. A fermented, complex, deliberately crafted beverage brewed 9,000 years ago by people who had every intention of getting exactly the result they got. McGovern even worked with a brewery to recreate it. You can, in theory, taste the Stone Age. It's sweet, it's sour, it's a little strange, and it's proof that the impulse to not just make alcohol, but to make it well, is ancient. So why did this one substance grab humanity by the collar and refuse to let go? Why does nearly every culture on Earth independently invent some way to ferment something? The answer isn't just, it feels good. It's deeper than that. Start with the practical. For most of history, water was dangerous. Rivers and wells carried diseases that could wipe out a village. But the fermentation process and the mild alcohol it produced killed off many of the things that made water deadly. In a very real sense, beer was safer than water. It was also food. A thick, ancient brew was packed with calories and nutrients. People called it liquid bread, and they weren't being poetic, they were being accurate. But the most powerful reason might be the one you'd least expect. Alcohol is social technology. When humans drink together, our guard drops. We talk more, we laugh more, we trust more. Our brains release endorphins. The walls between strangers get thinner. And for a species whose entire survival depended on cooperation, on dozens of unrelated people trusting each other enough to live and work side by side, that is not a small thing. That is the glue. Picture it. You're trying to get 100 people who don't all like each other to build a temple, share a harvest, settle a dispute without violence. What helps? A feast. A shared drink. A night where everyone loosens up, sings too loud, and wakes up bonded. Alcohol didn't just lubricate civilization. It may have been one of the tools that made large-scale human cooperation possible in the first place. By the time we reach the first true cities, alcohol isn't a curiosity anymore. It's infrastructure. In ancient Sumer, over 4,000 years ago, beer was so central that they wrote a hymn to the goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, and that hymn doubles as a recipe, a way to remember how to brew it in a world where most people couldn't read. Workers were paid in beer, daily rations of it. The people who built some of the first monuments in human history were, in part, compensated in alcohol. Your paycheck used to be a jug. And here's the uncomfortable part of the story, because there always is one. The same substance that helped build us has spent the rest of history extracting a price. The drunken monkey instinct that once led our ancestors to food now lives in a world overflowing with cheap, concentrated alcohol that our biology was never designed to handle. We evolved to find a little ethanol in a pile of fruit. We did not evolve for a bottle of spirits 40 times stronger than anything in nature, available on every corner. That ancient gift and that modern curse are the same thing. The instinct hasn't changed. The world around it has. A brain shaped by scarcity got dropped into a world of endless supply, and the gap between those two realities is where a great deal of human suffering lives. So when did humans discover alcohol? The honest answer is, we didn't, really. We never sat down and invented it. We inherited it. The taste was waiting for us in the trees before we were human. The instinct was written into our genes before we had language. And the moment we finally had the tools to make it ourselves, we didn't hesitate for a second, because some part of us already knew exactly what we were looking for. There's something almost poetic about that. Strip away the breweries and the labels and the marketing, and what you're left with is incredibly simple. A fallen fruit, a bit of wild yeast, a warmth that drew our ancestors closer to the fire and closer to each other. Next time you raise a glass, at a wedding, a funeral, a quiet evening, a celebration of something that mattered, you're not just having a drink. You're repeating one of the oldest gestures our species has. A gesture older than farms, older than cities, older than history itself. You're doing what humans have always done. You're reaching for the thing that brought us together.